My name is Ava. I'm 36 years old, a mother of one, and until recently, I would have described myself as someone who keeps the wheels turning quietly in the background. I live in Portland, Oregon. I work part-time as a pediatric nurse, which means I've built my life around small breaths, fragile bodies, and the quiet mathematics of survival. Most people see me as steady, soft-spoken, dependable, the kind of woman who remembers everyone's allergies, who brings labeled containers to family gatherings, who double-checks the seatbelts before the car even moves. They also see me as someone who doesn't make waves, and for a long time, that worked for everyone else. This story isn't about explosive confrontations or dramatic revenge. It's not about screaming matches at holiday dinners or viral social media takedowns. It's about something much quieter, something colder, something that unfolded slowly, like realizing the floor beneath you isn't solid wood, but thin glass. A year ago, my daughter was diagnosed with a serious autoimmune condition. Not immediately life-threatening, but unpredictable, expensive, frightening in ways only parents understand. There were hospital visits, medications that insurance didn't fully cover, and nights when I memorized the rhythm of her breathing instead of sleeping. During that time, I leaned on family, or at least I thought I did. Then, one afternoon, while waiting in the hospital cafeteria line, I saw my child's face on a sponsored post, a photograph taken in her hospital bed, her eyes half open, IV line taped to her arm. Above it were the words, "Save this baby, she might not survive." My daughter was stable, tired but stable, and underneath that post was a donation link, thousands of dollars raised, comments from strangers sending prayers. The organizer of the fundraiser was my sister. On that same day, she posted a selfie on her personal account. Perfect lighting, bandages along her hairline, captioned, "Finally did something for myself. $50,000 and worth every penny. New jawline, new nose, new life apparently." This is the story of what I did after that. Not publicly, not loudly, but thoroughly. It's about the role I had been assigned for most of my life. The reliable sister, the practical one, the one who cleans up messes, and how I quietly stepped out of it. It's about documentation, patience, legal clarity, and about the moment you realize that staying silent and being weak are not the same thing. I'm not here to paint my sister as a monster. People rarely wake up intending to become one. I'm here to tell the truth of what happened, how I responded, and what it cost, on both sides. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply withdraws its protection. Have you ever had a moment where you realized someone you trusted had been using your silence as permission? Before everything unraveled, I was the dependable one. That's what my family called me. If my sister, Lila, forgot a birthday gift, I had already bought two, just in case. If a holiday dinner needed coordinating, I had the spreadsheet. If our mother's prescriptions needed sorting, I handled it without being asked. Lila was different. She was magnetic, quick-witted, the kind of woman who could enter a room and bend it toward her. Growing up, teachers described her as full of potential. I was described as mature for my age. One of those phrases sparkles, the other stabilizes. At family gatherings, Lila told stories. I refilled drinks. She exaggerated details, and people laughed. I corrected timelines in my head, but never out loud. No one meant harm by it. That's the complicated part. Roles in families are rarely assigned with cruelty. They form like sediment, quietly, gradually. By my late 20s, it was simply understood. Lila dreamed. I handled reality. When my daughter, Sophie, was born, that dynamic deepened. Lila posted glamorous photos of herself traveling to Bali. I posted vaccination updates and sleep schedules. When Sophie got sick last year, the family turned to me for updates. Not because they didn't care, but because they trusted me to stay composed. I translated lab results into plain English for everyone. I reassured them. I absorbed their fear so they wouldn't have to feel it fully. Lila cried loudly at the hospital during the first week. She took pictures of herself holding Sophie's hand. She captioned them with heart emojis and inspirational quotes. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Grief looks different on different people, but there were small moments, subtle ones, that hinted at the imbalance. Like when a distant cousin messaged me, I saw Lila's post. Is Sophie really critical? Critical? No. Fragile, yes, but monitored, stable. I remember feeling a flicker of discomfort, then brushing it away. Maybe the cousin misunderstood. Maybe Lila was just emotional. That's what I did best, I rationalized. I told myself that being the quiet one was a choice, that restraint was maturity, that letting Lila have the spotlight cost me nothing, because for years it hadn't, or so I believed. At family dinners, when someone joked, "Ava will fix it," everyone laughed warmly. It was meant as a compliment, and I smiled. But underneath that smile was something I didn't examine closely. A steady erosion, not dramatic enough to name. Just a pattern. I was reliable, useful, calm, invisible in ways that only matter when something goes wrong. And when it did go wrong, when I saw my child's face, used as a headline for strangers' pity, I realized something painful. They hadn't seen me as quiet because I was strong. They had seen me as quiet because they assumed I would endure anything. And endurance in the wrong hands becomes permission. The first time something felt wrong, it didn't look like a crime. It looked like compassion. 3 weeks into Sophie's diagnosis, Lila offered to help raise awareness. That was the phrase she used. We were sitting in the hospital's family lounge, the hum of vending machines filling the silence between us. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," she said, squeezing my hand. "People care. Let them." I remember nodding. I was tired. The kind of tired that blurs edges. She asked if she could post a photo. Just one, she promised, to update everyone. I hesitated, but not because I suspected her. I hesitated because Sophie looked small in that hospital bed. Vulnerable. Still, I said yes. That was the first small cut. The photo she chose wasn't the one where Sophie was sitting up, coloring. It wasn't the one where she smiled weakly at the nurse. It was the one where she looked the sickest. Eyes closed, oxygen tube visible. Skin as pale under fluorescent light. The caption read, "Watching my baby niece fight for her life is breaking me. Please pray." Fight for her life. I stared at that phrase longer than I want to admit. Sophie wasn't dying. She was undergoing treatment. There's a difference. A huge one. Within hours, comments poured in. So tragic. How long does she have? Stay strong, warrior princess. And then the messages began. People asking how they could donate. At first, Lila forwarded them to me. "Should we set something up?" she asked. I told her no. We were managing. Insurance covered most of it. I had savings. I worked extra shifts. It was tight, but controlled. She responded with a heart emoji. 2 days later, she told me she'd created a small fundraiser just in case. I remember the exact sensation in my chest when she said it. Not anger. Not yet. Displacement. Just in case what? I asked. In case things get worse, she replied lightly. You're too proud to ask for help, Ava. It was framed as generosity, as foresight, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. That's the thing about subtle disrespect. It hides behind good intentions. If you question it, you look defensive. If you accept it, you surrender a boundary. I chose politeness. Okay, I said, but keep it accurate. She smiled. Of course. I didn't check the page that night. I was at Sophie's bedside, counting her breaths between IV beeps. The next morning, while scrolling in the cafeteria, I saw it. The fundraiser title wasn't medical support for Sophie. It was Save This Baby Before It's Too Late. Before it's too late. There was no timeline, no medical clarity, just urgency, fear, a goal of $75,000. And already $18,400 had been raised. My hands went cold. It wasn't the money that unsettled me. It was the narrative. Sophie's condition was complex, but not terminal. And yet strangers were mourning her in the comments as if she were already slipping away. I called Lila immediately. She answered breathless. Isn't it incredible? People are so generous. Incredible isn't the word I'd use, I said quietly. There was a pause. It's just wording, she replied. You're being technical. Technical. I've spent my entire adult life being technical about children's health because precision matters. But in that moment, I told myself something I regret. She doesn't mean harm. It's just dramatic phrasing. She'll tone it down. That was the first small cut, not the fundraiser itself, but the realization that my standards for truth and hers were no longer aligned. And the more dangerous realization, she assumed I would let it slide, because I always had. If the first small cut startled me, the next ones taught me something more dangerous. They taught me how easily people adjust to discomfort when it's gradual. Within a week, the fundraiser passed $40,000. Strangers shared it across parenting groups and community pages. The phrasing grew more dramatic with each repost. Doctors have given little hope. Time is running out. No doctor had said that. When I texted Lila screenshots, she replied with variations of the same message. People embellish when they care. You're focusing on semantics. This is helping your daughter. Helping. That word was repeated so often it began to feel like a shield. At family dinners, relatives congratulated her on her initiative. Lila stepped up, they said. She's amazing with social media. I sat at the end of the table nodding. No one asked me whether the information was accurate. They assumed I approved because I wasn't objecting publicly. Silence becomes endorsement when it's consistent enough. I told myself I didn't have the energy to fight over wording. Sophie's lab numbers mattered more. Her appetite, her energy levels, her tiny complaints about hospital food. But then something shifted subtly. Donors began messaging me directly. One woman wrote, "I'm praying your baby makes it through this final stage." Final stage. Another said, "My husband and I cried watching her video. We can't imagine preparing for goodbye." Preparing for goodbye. Each message felt like stepping into a parallel universe where my daughter was dying, and I hadn't been informed. I confronted Lila again, gently. I even practiced the phrasing beforehand. "Can we update the language to be more medically accurate?" I asked over coffee. "It's causing confusion." She leaned back, studying me. "You've always been like this," she said calmly. "So rigid, so clinical." Clinical. It wasn't an insult on the surface. It was framed as a personality difference. "You're under stress," she continued. "You can't see that I'm doing this for you." That's when I felt the second realization forming. Not sharp like the first, but heavier. She wasn't misunderstanding me. She was reframing me. In her version of events, I was the ungrateful one, the overreactive one, the emotionally stunted sister who couldn't appreciate generosity. And because I had spent decades being the reasonable one, I started questioning myself. Maybe I was too rigid. Maybe the emotional angle brought more donations. Maybe this was a harmless exaggeration in the name of good. Normalization doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a series of compromises that feel practical at the time. When the fundraiser crossed $60,000, Lila stopped copying me on updates. She handled comments independently. She posted tearful videos talking about holding hope. In one live stream, she said, "We're just trying to buy her more time. Buy her more time." I stared at my phone in the dim hospital room, Sophie asleep beside me, her vitals steady. The narrative had outgrown me, and I had allowed it to, not because I was weak, but because I had convinced myself that correcting her would create unnecessary conflict during an already fragile season. Peace over precision, harmony over truth. I chose quiet again, but something inside me was starting to catalog details. Dates, phrases, screenshots. Not out of revenge, out of unease, because somewhere beneath the rationalizations I felt it clearly now. This wasn't just dramatization, it was control, and she was comfortable rewriting reality as long as I stayed the quiet one. There's a moment in every long pattern where you finally see it from the outside, not as individual incidents, but as a script. I saw it one Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. Sophie was home that day, curled on the couch under a pale pink blanket, watching cartoons with the volume low. Her cheeks were fuller again. Her color had returned. She was tired, but she was healing. Lila arrived late as usual, sunglasses oversized, voices already pitched for storytelling. "How's our little fighter?" she asked, kneeling dramatically beside Sophie. "Our little fighter." Sophie smiled politely. She's always been perceptive. Even at 6, she can feel when adults are performing. During lunch, the conversation drifted, as it often did, to the fundraiser. "It's incredible what Lila's done," my aunt said, shaking her head in admiration. $68,000. I don't know how you'd manage without her." Everyone nodded. I felt their eyes flicker toward me briefly, waiting for confirmation. And there it was, the role. I was expected to look grateful, to validate her, to keep the narrative intact. What struck me wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even anger. It was the realization that my lived experience, the hospital nights, the insurance calls, the medication schedules, had been quietly replaced by a more compelling version of events. In their minds, Lila had become the savior of a crisis, and I had become the overwhelmed mother she rescued. It didn't matter that I had never asked to be rescued. It didn't matter that I had managed every medical decision, every bill, every consultation. Visibility matters more than labor. Lila told them she was exhausted from managing updates. She described messages from donors who couldn't stop crying. She implied doctors were still unsure. Unsure about what? I wanted to ask. But I didn't, because if I corrected her in that room, I would become the difficult one, the sister who couldn't appreciate support. The woman was creating tension at Sunday lunch, and I had spent my entire life avoiding that label. That afternoon, I stepped into the kitchen to refill Sophie's water bottle. My mother followed me. "You should let Lila handle this," she said softly. "She's good at this kind of thing. You focus on Sophie." Good at this kind of thing. The unspoken meaning was clear. Lila was good at emotion. I was good at logistics. That was the role. Reliable, useful, invisible. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Even the fundraiser account wasn't in my name. It was in hers. She had framed it as easier that way. She managed the passwords, the withdrawals, the updates. I had allowed it because I trusted my family, and because stepping into the spotlight felt unnatural to me. But that day, standing at my parents' kitchen sink, watching sunlight reflect off the faucet, something settled in my chest with quiet certainty. I had mistaken avoidance for kindness. By not asserting boundaries earlier, I had allowed my role to be defined entirely by what made others comfortable. No one had maliciously assigned it, but everyone had benefited from it, especially her. When I returned to the table, Lila was laughing at something. Her hands were animated. Her presence fills the room. I looked at her differently then. Not as my impulsive little sister, but as someone who had grown very comfortable being the hero in a story she didn't fully understand. And I realized something else too. If I ever chose to step out of this role, it wouldn't require shouting. It would require precision. The shift didn't happen during an argument. It didn't happen when I saw the donation total hit $72,000. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sophie and I were back at the hospital for a routine follow-up. Not an emergency, just labs, a consultation, the slow rhythm of long-term management. She was sitting in the exam chair, swinging her legs gently, humming to herself while I filled out paperwork. A young nurse I hadn't met before came in, glanced at Sophie's chart, and then paused. "Oh," she said softly. "You're that Sophie?" I looked up. "That fundraiser, my cousin shared it," she continued carefully. "We were all praying. I didn't realize she was doing so well now." Doing so well now. The implication was clear. At some point, the narrative had suggested she wasn't. I smiled politely and said, "She's been stable for weeks." The nurse hesitated. "That's wonderful." The page made it sound different. Different. It was the gentlest word she could have chosen. After she left, I sat very still. Sophie was busy examining a sticker the nurse had given her. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon wipes. And for the first time, I allowed myself to stop defending Lila in my own head. I stopped searching for the innocent explanation, because this wasn't just dramatic phrasing anymore. It was misinformation circulating in medical spaces. It was strangers adjusting their understanding of my daughter's prognosis based on exaggeration. This wasn't about pride. It was about truth. And truth matters when you work in healthcare. It matters when you're asking people to trust a system. It matters when donors are parting with their money under emotional pressure. I opened the fundraiser page again right there in that exam room. The language had escalated. Each day could be her last. We're racing against time. I felt something inside me settle, not explode, settle, like a glass placed carefully on a table instead of being thrown against a wall. There would be no confrontation in that hospital hallway. No frantic phone call. Just clarity. For months, I had been reacting emotionally. Hurt, confused, defensive. But in that moment, I moved into something colder and more structured. I wasn't just Sophie's mother. I was also a licensed pediatric nurse. I understood the documentation. I understood liability. I understood what happens when funds are raised under potentially misleading claims. And most importantly, I understood that silence could be misinterpreted legally as consent. The shift was simple. I stopped asking whether Lila meant well, and I started asking whether what she was doing was correct. That's a very different question. On the drive home, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat. Traffic lights blinked red against the gray Portland sky. I didn't cry. I didn't rehearse angry speeches. I mentally listed facts. Amount raised, language used, ownership of account, screenshots I had saved. It wasn't revenge forming. It was a boundary, a line drawn not in emotion but in responsibility. That Tuesday morning, something fundamental changed. I was no longer the overwhelmed sister trying to keep the peace. I was a mother protecting her child's narrative, and I understood something with absolute calm. If I didn't correct this carefully, it wouldn't just cost money. It would cost integrity. Mine, and potentially hers. After that Tuesday, I didn't confront Lila. That surprised even me. The old version of me would have sent a carefully worded message. Something gentle. Something like, "Hey, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about the language on the page. Can we adjust it?" But I already knew how that conversation would unfold. I would be called sensitive, or rigid, or too clinical, and the narrative would continue. So instead, I chose something different. I chose silence. But this time, it wasn't avoidance. It was an observation, Over the next 2 weeks, I stopped reacting to the fundraiser publicly. I didn't like the posts. I didn't comment. I didn't correct her in family group chats. And almost immediately, I noticed something subtle. Without my quiet endorsement, Lila's tone shifted. Her post became more performative, more urgent. She leaned harder into the tragedy angle. Every donation helps extend her fight. We're not sure how much time we have. I screenshotted everything, not obsessively, just consistently. Date, time, language. I opened a folder on my laptop titled simply, Sophie Public Statements. Inside it, I created subfolders. Fundraiser page, live videos, direct messages. It wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. At work, I was used to charting tiny changes in a patient's condition. Now, I was charting narrative shifts. Meanwhile, Lila interpreted my quiet as surrender. At a family dinner, she casually mentioned, Ava finally realized I'm better at handling the public side. I didn't correct her. I watched. There's a kind of power in letting someone believe you've stepped back, especially when they mistake your stillness for incapacity. She began withdrawing funds in increments. She told relatives she was managing expenses. No one asked to see receipts. Why would they? She was emotional, devoted, visible. I noticed something else too. Her own social media began to change. Subtle at first. Posts about self-investment. Quotes about finally choosing myself. A consultation appointment at a cosmetic surgery clinic. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I documented dates. Because in healthcare and in life, timelines matter. One evening, after putting Sophie to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my black leather planner open. I wrote 3 columns. What I know, what I can prove, what I feel. The 3rd column was the smallest. Not because I didn't feel hurt, but because feelings wouldn't matter if this escalated. Facts would. And here's the part that changed everything. I stopped viewing this as a sister conflict. I began viewing it as a financial and ethical situation involving my child's medical identity. When you shift the lens that way, emotion becomes secondary. Silence became strategic. Not to trap her, not to humiliate her, but to allow patterns to fully reveal themselves without interference. People are most honest when they believe no one is watching closely. And for the first time in my life, I was watching Lila without defending her. I didn't know yet exactly what I would do, but I knew one thing clearly. When I finally spoke, it would not be from confusion. It would be from certainty. Preparation doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like routine, like a woman answering emails after her child falls asleep, like someone updating spreadsheets, like ordinary life continuing. That's why no one noticed what I was doing, including Lila. The first thing I did was request a full itemized statement from Sophie's insurance provider in the hospital billing department. Not because I didn't know our expenses, I did, but because I wanted documented clarity. Total billed, total covered, total owed. The remaining out-of-pocket costs were significant, but nowhere near the $75,000 goal on the fundraiser. Not even close. I created a clean, chronological record of Sophie's diagnosis and treatment plan using official medical summaries. Not emotional language, just facts, dates, physician notes. Then I downloaded the entire fundraiser page as a PDF. Every update, every comment section, every edit history I could access. I began noticing inconsistencies. The earlier posts were dramatic. The latter ones escalated. Phrases like final options appeared after routine follow-ups. Experimental treatments were mentioned, though Sophie's protocol was standard and well-established. I wasn't angry while compiling this. I was calm in a way that surprised me, because once something becomes data, it becomes manageable. Next, I quietly consulted someone outside the family. Not a dramatic lawyer meeting in a downtown office, just a brief informational call with a colleague's husband who specializes in nonprofit compliance. I framed it hypothetically. If someone raises funds under medically exaggerated claims, I asked, Jonah, what are the implications? He didn't hesitate. It depends on intent, he said. But if representations are materially misleading and funds are used for purposes not aligned with the stated cause, that can trigger serious issues. Civil at minimum, potentially criminal if proven fraudulent. I wrote that down, not because I wanted her punished, because I wanted to understand the landscape fully before I stepped into it. Meanwhile, Lila continued performing compassion online. She filmed a tearful update one evening, standing in her car for privacy. She talked about exhausting consultations and hoping we can buy more time. That same week, she posted a discreet story tagging a cosmetic surgery center in Los Angeles. The tag disappeared after 24 hours. But screenshots don't disappear. The timeline was tightening. Fundraiser withdrawals increased in frequency around the same dates as her consultation appointments. I cross-referenced transaction patterns with public posts. No assumptions, just alignment. At family gatherings, she looked radiant, a new subtle contour to her jawline, a slight tightness near her temples. She said she was just taking better care of herself, and everyone admired her resilience. They never noticed that I had stopped explaining Sophie's condition to them in detail. I answered briefly, directly, without emotional cushioning. They assumed I was exhausted. In reality, I was repositioning, because here's what they never noticed. The dependable sister wasn't withdrawing in defeat. She was stepping out of a narrative she didn't authorize. I opened a separate savings account in Sophie's name, not connected to Lila, not connected to family, just clean and documented. If funds were meant for my daughter, they would eventually land where they belonged, one way or another. By the end of that month, I had something far more powerful than anger. I had clarity, clear discrepancies, clear timelines, clear options. And clarity does something extraordinary. It removes fear. I wasn't afraid of confrontation anymore. I was waiting for the right one. The private reveal didn't come from hacking into anything. It came from something much simpler. Documentation leaves trails, especially when people become comfortable. One afternoon, Lila forwarded me a screenshot of a donor message. She meant it as proof of support, another stranger thanking her for giving Sophie a fighting chance. But in the corner of that screenshot, partially visible, was a notification banner from her banking app. Transfer complete, $12,500. The date matched a fundraiser withdrawal I had logged 2 days earlier. That alone wasn't proof of misuse. Transfers could mean many things. Medical bills, reimbursements, administrative movement. So I did nothing. 2 weeks later, she invited me over to see something exciting. I already suspected what it was. Her living room smelled faintly of antiseptic cream. The curtains were drawn halfway. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors, smiling carefully. "I finally did it," she said. "I've been saving for years." Saving. She removed the glasses slowly. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. A refined nose bridge, a lifted jawline. Smoothness where there had once been softness. "It's not finished healing," she added quickly. "Don't judge." I didn't. I observed. "How much?" I asked neutrally. She hesitated for half a second. "Around 50,000. The fundraiser had crossed 73,000 by then. I nodded once. She began explaining financing options, consultations, and how long she'd wanted this. She spoke quickly, almost defensively, as if anticipating a reaction. I gave her none, because in that moment, I understood something with piercing clarity. The money had never felt abstract to her. It had felt accessible, not directly stolen, at least not in her narrative. She would likely tell herself she deserved something for the emotional labor. Managing donations was work, that she had sacrificed her time. Self-justification rarely announces itself as wrongdoing, but the math was undeniable. The week before her surgery, the fundraiser had withdrawn $15,000. The week after, another $20,000. And Sophie's medical bills during that period? Under $4,000. I went home that evening and opened my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder. Final confirmation. I compiled everything into a single document. Timeline of fundraiser creation, language escalation, donation totals, withdrawal patterns, public statements about running out of time, surgery consultation dates, surgery payment window. It aligned too cleanly to ignore. And here's the quietest, most important realization of all. I understood that if I confronted her privately and accepted a partial repayment, it would disappear into family secrecy. She would apologize, blame stress, promise correction, and nothing would fundamentally change. But if I escalated externally, formally, there would be consequences that extended beyond our relationship. This wasn't just about my daughter's image anymore. It was about public trust. Thousands of strangers believed they were funding a dying child. They weren't. The private reveal wasn't emotional. It was mathematical. And once you see the full equation, you can't pretend it's incomplete. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, I sat with my planner open again. Under options, I wrote 3 words. Confront quietly. Demand repayment privately. Report formally. Each path carried weight. Only one was irreversible. And irreversible decisions require absolute calm. I didn't decide that night, but I knew I was close. Irreversible decisions rarely feel dramatic in the moment you make them. They feel quiet, measured, almost anticlimactic. For 3 days, I sat with the options. I went to work. I charted patient vitals. I packed Sophie's lunch. I folded laundry. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inside, I was weighing outcomes. If I confronted Lila privately, she would cry. She would say she never meant harm. She would offer to work something out. Our parents would ask me to keep it within the family. They would say, "Don't ruin her life over this." If I demanded repayment privately, it might restore the money, but not the truth. Donors would still believe their contributions saved a child from imminent death. The narrative would remain intact. And if I reported formally, there would be documentation, an investigation, potential civil or criminal consequences depending on findings, public scrutiny. There would be no controlling how far it went. That was the weight of it. I wasn't choosing between comfort and discomfort. I was choosing between silence and integrity. On the 4th morning, I received a message from a donor, a man in his late 60s. He wrote that he had donated $5,000 from his late wife's memorial fund because no child should leave this world before her parents. I read that line 3 times. No child should leave this world before her parents. Sophie was eating cereal at the kitchen counter when I read it. Milk dribbled down her chin. She was arguing with me about whether dinosaurs had feathers. She was alive, stabilizing, planning her next art project. And somewhere, a grieving widower believed he was funding a final goodbye. That was the moment the decision made itself. Not out of anger toward Lila, out of responsibility to the people who had given in good faith. I opened my laptop and drafted a factual, unemotional summary. No accusations, no adjectives, just documentation. I attached screenshots, transaction patterns, public posts, and medical summaries clarifying Sophie's actual condition. Before sending anything, I paused. I asked myself one final question. Am I doing this to punish her? The answer came clearly. No. If punishment were the goal, I would have confronted her in front of our family. I would have exposed her publicly first. I would have sought humiliation. This wasn't that. This was a correction. Systems exist for a reason. Fundraising platforms have compliance departments. Financial institutions track patterns. State agencies oversee charitable misrepresentation. I wasn't acting outside the law. I was stepping into it. With one final breath, I submitted the documentation to the fundraising platform's fraud review department, not anonymously, with my full name. I did not warn her. I did not hint, because a warning gives someone time to reshape the story. By the time I closed my laptop, something unexpected settled over me. Relief. Not because consequences would follow, but because I was no longer carrying the burden of deciding. The irreversible path had been chosen. Quietly, deliberately, and from that point forward, events would move based on facts, not family dynamics. For the first time in months, I slept deeply. After I submitted the report, nothing happened. At least nothing visible, and that was the strange part. When people imagine consequences, they picture immediate fallout. Locked accounts, dramatic phone calls, public exposure. Real processes are slower, quieter, procedural. 3 days after my submission, I received an automated confirmation from the fundraising platform. Your concern has been received and is under review. No emotion, no urgency, just acknowledgement. I archived it. I did not check the fundraiser page obsessively. I looked once per day, like checking a patient's vitals on schedule. On day 5, I noticed something small. Withdrawals had stopped. The page was still active. Donations still trickled in. But no new transfers appeared in the public activity log. I said nothing. At work, I functioned normally. At home, I helped Sophie practice spelling words. I attended a follow-up appointment where her physician confirmed her progress was very encouraging. Encouraging. A word grounded in reality. Meanwhile, Lila continued posting updates, but the tone subtly shifted. Instead of "time is running out," she began saying, "We're taking things one day at a time." Less urgency, fewer absolutes. That told me the platform had likely contacted her for clarification. Compliance teams don't accuse immediately. They ask for documentation, medical verification, expense breakdowns. I imagined her inbox filling with polite but firm requests. Please provide proof of diagnosis. Please provide invoices corresponding to withdrawals. Please clarify statements made regarding prognosis. And here is where silence became its own strategy. She texted me casually one evening. "Hey, do you have copies of Sophie's latest medical summaries?" The platform once updated documentation. There it was. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Yes. What exactly are they requesting?" "Just standard verification stuff," she wrote quickly. "It's annoying." "Annoying," I responded with precision. "I'm happy to provide accurate medical summaries. I won't provide documentation that supports misleading claims." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Why would you say that?" she asked. "Because you know why," I thought. But I typed something calmer. Accuracy protects everyone. She didn't reply for an hour. When she did, it was shorter. Just send the summaries. I sent the official documents, no commentary attached. Medical condition, current prognosis, treatment plan, no language about imminent death. From that point forward, the system did what systems are designed to do. Within 2 weeks, the fundraiser page displayed a notice. Campaign temporarily paused pending review. No accusations, just procedural language. Family members began messaging me, confused. Do you know what's going on? Why would they pause it? I answered honestly. I don't know the full details. I assume they're verifying information. Which was true. I didn't tell them I had initiated it. Not yet, because at this stage, it wasn't about confrontation. It was about allowing the process to complete without interference. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't cleaning up quietly behind someone else's narrative. I was letting the truth move forward on its own timeline. No shouting, no dramatic exposure, just documentation meeting oversight. An oversight asking questions she could no longer answer loosely. Consequences rarely announce themselves with sirens. They begin as disruptions, small fractures in routine. A week after the fundraiser was paused, Lila stopped posting daily updates. Her stories grew sparse. The emotional live videos disappeared entirely. Family group chats shifted tone. Is everything okay with the page? My aunt asked. Lila replied with something vague about platform technical issues. Technical issues. I watched the phrasing carefully. She still believed she could outmaneuver the situation by minimizing it. But systems don't respond to charisma. They respond to documentation. 3 days later, the fundraiser page changed again. This time, the banner read, Campaign under compliance review. Donations temporarily disabled. Disabled, not paused. Disabled. That's when the phone calls began. My mother called first. Her voice was tight. Lila says they're accusing her of misrepresentation, she said. Can you believe that? After everything she's done? I listened. I let the silence stretch just enough. I believe platforms verify claims when large amounts of money are involved, I said evenly. She's devastated, my mother continued. They're asking for detailed expense reports. As they should, I thought. I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I asked a simple question. Did she keep receipts? There was a pause. I'm sure she did, my mother replied, but her certainty sounded thinner than usual. That evening, Lila texted me. They're demanding itemized proof for every withdrawal, she wrote. This is insane. It's like they think I did something wrong. I read the message twice before responding. They're asking for alignment between funds raised and medical expenses, I typed. That's standard. Another pause. They're freezing the remaining balance, she added. Freezing. That meant there was still money in the account. Money donors believed was supporting Sophie. I imagined compliance officers reviewing timestamps, comparing language, and evaluating discrepancies. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Because the consequences weren't emotional, they were structural. Within days, rumors began circulating among extended relatives. Some heard that the platform was suspected of fraud. Others heard that haters had reported the campaign. Lila began posting vague statements about being attacked during a vulnerable time. Victimhood is a familiar refuge, but this time, something was different. She couldn't control the narrative entirely, because the questions weren't coming from family. They were coming from outside institutions that required evidence. A week later, she called me late at night. Her voice wasn't theatrical this time. It was small. They're asking if any funds were used for non-medical expenses, she said quietly. I let the silence exist between us. They're asking if I personally benefited. There it was. The question she had likely been avoiding in her own mind. Did you? I asked calmly. She didn't answer directly. They don't understand how stressful this has been, she said instead. Stress doesn't equal entitlement, I thought. But I didn't argue, because the consequences had already begun. Not with shouting, not with public humiliation, but with paperwork, with review panels, with requests for clarity she could no longer answer loosely. And for the first time in her life, charm wasn't enough. Documentation was required. The unraveling didn't happen in one dramatic collapse. It happened in stages. First, the fundraiser platform issued a formal notice requesting reimbursement documentation for withdrawals that did not align with verified medical expenses. They gave her a deadline. 10 business days. 10 days to explain tens of thousands of dollars. Lila tried to control the situation the only way she knew how, by managing perception. She posted a statement saying the platform was reviewing technical discrepancies. She framed it as bureaucratic insensitivity. She implied the system was punishing a family in crisis. But something had shifted in the comments. For the first time, donors began asking direct questions. Can you clarify the medical updates? Are there invoices you can share? Is Sophie still critical? Critical. That word again. She texted me repeatedly that week. They're threatening to refund donations, she wrote. They want access to bank statements. They're saying some language may have violated terms of service. I responded minimally, factually. If they find inconsistencies, they'll act accordingly. That was all I offered. On the 8th day, she called me crying. Not the public kind of crying, not the performative version I'd seen in videos. This was different. They might refer it to state regulators, she whispered. They're saying if funds were materially misrepresented, it could escalate. Escalate. The word hung between us. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. That sentence told me everything. She hadn't thought past the moment, past the emotion, past the visibility. She had assumed the narrative would protect her. That, being the caring aunt, would shield her from scrutiny. I worked so hard managing it, she said. I deserved something. There it was. Not denial, just justification. You deserved recognition, I said evenly. Not donor money. Silence. The next day, the platform publicly updated the page. Campaign removed due to violation of fundraising policies. Remaining funds under review. Removed. No more comments, no more shares, no more dramatic captions. Just gone. Within 48 hours, donors began receiving notices about potential refunds pending investigation. Some were issued automatically. Others required verification. Family phones lit up. What's happening? Did someone report her? Why would they remove it? Lila called an emergency family meeting at my parents' house. Her face was pale, jaw still slightly swollen from surgery. The contrast was stark. Cosmetic refinement layered over visible panic. She looked at me differently now, not as the quiet sister, but as someone who might know more than she was saying, because at this point it was too late to fix privately. The system was already moving. Funds were frozen, documentation was requested, refunds were being processed, and for the first time, Lila wasn't asking how to spin it. She was asking how to survive it. The narrative she built had collapsed under its own weight, and no amount of emotion could reconstruct it. The family meeting felt smaller than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Lila sat at the dining table, hands folded tightly, phone face down in front of her. Our parents hovered nearby, tense and confused. A few relatives joined by video call. Everyone was waiting for something. An explanation, a defense, a villain. Lila spoke first. The platform misunderstood, she began. They're saying the language was misleading and that some withdrawals weren't properly documented. Properly documented. It was almost clinical now. My father cleared his throat. Were they? She hesitated. I paid for things related to stress, travel, time off. I invested so much emotional labor into this. There it was again. Emotional labor translated into entitlement. The room grew quiet, and then slowly all eyes turned to me. I hadn't planned a speech. I didn't need one. I submitted the medical summaries they requested, I said calmly. They reflect Sophie's actual condition. Lila's gaze sharpened. Did you report the campaign? There it was, direct. I didn't flinch. Yes. No defensiveness, no raised voice, just truth. The silence that followed was heavy, but not explosive. You could have talked to me first, she said, her voice trembling. I did, I replied evenly, multiple times about accuracy. She looked down. I never intended to hurt Sophie, she said. I know, I answered, and I meant it. Intention wasn't the argument. Impact was. You let people believe she was dying, I continued quietly. A man donated from his wife's memorial fund because he thought he was funding her final days. That detail shifted the room. Faces changed. My mother sat down slowly. Lila swallowed hard. I know, I said again. That's the problem. There was no shouting, no dramatic accusations. Just clarity. You used her image to create urgency that didn't exist, I said. And you withdrew funds that didn't align with her medical expenses. Her shoulders sagged. I was going to pay it back, she whispered. When? I asked gently. She didn't answer. Because repayment after exposure isn't restitution. It's a reaction. My father finally spoke. What happens now? I answered plainly. The platform will likely issue refunds for questionable withdrawals. If regulators review it, they'll determine the next steps. It depends on documentation. I didn't mention potential civil penalties. I didn't speculate. Facts only. Lila looked at me differently then, not with anger, but with something closer to recognition. For the first time, she wasn't seeing the quiet sister. She was seeing someone who would not absorb consequences on her behalf. You ruined me, she said softly. No, I replied. I stopped protecting something that wasn't true. The distinction mattered. The meeting ended without resolution, without reconciliation. Just understanding, not warmth. not forgiveness, but reality, finally sitting in the center of the table where performance used to be. It's been 9 months since the fundraiser was removed. The final outcome was less dramatic than people imagined. The platform issued partial refunds where documentation didn't match. The remaining balance, after verified medical expenses, was transferred directly into an account in Sophie's name, with strict oversight. There was no public trial, no headlines, but there were consequences. Lila was required to enter a repayment agreement for portions deemed personal benefit. Her reputation shifted quietly in our extended community. Invitations slowed. Sponsorship offers disappeared. Nothing explosive, just recalibration. We don't speak the way we used to. There are no screaming matches, no icy standoffs. There is distance, measured, intentional. And in that distance, I've learned something unexpected about myself. I was never invisible. I was observant. I was never weak. I was patient. For years, I believed my silence existed to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to maintain family stability. Now I understand something deeper. Silence is neutral. It becomes weak only when it protects dishonesty. The moment it protects truth, it becomes strength. Sophie is thriving. Her condition remains managed, not cured, but stable. She doesn't know the details of what happened. She only knows that the money in her account is for her future medical needs, and someday, maybe college. That's enough. As for me, I no longer accept the role of the reasonable one. If reasonable means absorbing harm quietly, I still don't shout. I still don't perform outrage. But when something crosses a boundary, I don't negotiate with it internally for months. I act, calmly, directly. There's a difference between compassion and complicity. I used to blur that line. Now I don't. Lila once told me I was too clinical, too precise. Maybe I am. But precision protects people, especially children who don't get to choose the narratives built around them. If there's one thing that changed most, it's this. I no longer measure my worth by how much discomfort I can endure for others. I measure it by how clearly I can stand when something isn't right. And I stand much straighter now. Not louder. Just unmovable. When people hear this story, they usually expect one of two endings. Either explosive revenge or tearful reconciliation. What happened instead was quieter. A correction. No one was publicly destroyed. No dramatic courtroom scenes unfolded. But the illusion collapsed. The money was traced. The refunds were issued. The boundaries were redrawn. And something important shifted, not just in my family, but in me. We talk a lot about loyalty, about protecting the family at all costs. But loyalty without accountability becomes permission. And permission, when paired with visibility and money, can distort even the people we love. I don't believe my sister woke up one day planning to exploit my daughter. I believe she convinced herself she deserved compensation for emotional effort. I believe she blurred the lines slowly enough that she stopped seeing them. That's how most harm happens, not in villainous declarations, in rationalizations. What this taught me is simple but not easy. You can love someone and still refuse to protect their dishonesty. You can remain calm and still be immovable. You can choose systems over secrets. And perhaps most importantly, being quiet does not mean being powerless. For years, I thought strength looked like endurance, like absorbing tension so others wouldn't feel it. Now I understand strength differently. It looks like documentation, like clarity, like saying, yes, I reported it without raising your voice. Sophie will grow up one day and learn that her story was protected, not dramatized for sympathy. That matters to me more than preserving anyone's comfort. So I'll leave you with this. If someone you love crossed a line in your name, would you keep it private to protect them? Or would you choose the harder path to protect the truth?